Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. Today, Friday, December 9th. We are all the way to the end of the year. It's good to be with you today. As always, upcoming events in the local and national ecosystem. Then FDA news. We have a few items today that we'll be talking about. First of all, we're going to be telling you about the event on December 6th that I got to attend in Massachusetts, MassMedic's regulatory Roundup featuring Jeff Shuren from CDRH. We'll be talking about the draft guidance on human factors, all that stuff about how does this work with people. We'll be telling you about that. And also, there are 39, did you know this? 39 cleared virtual reality or augmented reality devices that FDA has brought to the market. We'll be telling you about those, as well as our interview from the MedHealth Summit with Dr. Philip Olla. That's a really fun interview with him. We'll be bringing that to you at the end of today's show. But first, let's cover the upcoming events in the local and national ecosystem. December 13th is the A2 Biosocial. That is put on by MishBio, Spark, and MyLead. And Matthew Himes is the guy behind that. That's happening at Pretzel Bell, Tuesday, December 13th. So I hope you can make it out to the A2 Biosocial. Scan the QR code to get connected to that. Then on January 16th, of 2023. This is a very exclusive club, I guess, as it were, but applications are due for the COVID-19 and Health Equity Awards. FDA is going to be making about $2 million of awards, but probably only about 4 total awards for about $500,000 each. This is for people who think they have something to contribute to health disparities or pursuing health equity, especially as it relates to COVID-19. And so get involved with that if you're looking for funding and you think that your technology or product might have something to do with that. Then on January 23rd and 24th, the Social Determinants of Health Summit. If you've been listening to this show recently, you know how much of a focus there's been in the MedTech community on things that go beyond a single doctor-patient interface. What's happening with trends among demographics, in different parts of the country, even in different neighborhoods. And so the Social Determinants of Health Summit will be in San Diego, California, January 23rd and 24th. Then on January 31st, coming up, our friend Diane Bowie was on the show not too long ago, but applications are open for MedTech Innovator, also the BioTools Innovator and MedTech Innovator Asia Pacific. They are an accelerator that is, they're gigantic, frankly, and lots of resources there. If you're interested in that, in getting some support from MedTech Innovator, they are open. Their deadline is January 31st. And then coming up in January and February, our friends over at Fast Forward Medical Innovation at the University of Michigan Medical School are running Biomedical Innovation 101. They're going to be talking about intro to research commercialization, drug discovery, diagnostic technologies, digital health technologies, biomedical device development. Our own Adrian Harris will be part of that event on February 15th. And then next steps in commercialization resources. One of the things I love about Fast Forward and so many of our friends at these various universities throughout the state is they try to make these resources available to all of us. And that's the case here with these seminars coming up in January and February. And we were asked to please put this on the calendar. It's a whole year away, but November 14th through 16th, 2023, the Combination Product Summit is returning to Columbus, Ohio next year. That should be another great event. And October 8th through 10th, as we mentioned last week of 2023, the next installment of the Eye and the Chip 2023 is coming to the Southfield Westin Hotel. We had Dr. Hesberg on the show last week. What an amazing researcher, sort of following his nose beyond what he could have been turning the crank on into a world that is just starting to explode, this convergence of cognition and vision and sensors. We'll be hearing later in the show today from Dr. Philip Olla, our interview at MedHealth. His company, Audacia, is thinking about sensors in places like vehicles, and that really merges the world of transportation with the world of MedTech, because frankly, you can't use a lot of that data unless you're thinking about medical device technologies. So it's a fascinating nexus. And we hope you can attend some of these events. We'll continue putting new events for 2023 on the calendar, even as we come here to the end of 2022. Next up, FDA and industry news. We're wired for sound today. You may have noticed we changed all of the audio equipment here in the studio, so hopefully everyone is liking the sound better. But hopefully you'll like this information even better than the sound. I think it's really cool. FDA has cleared 39 virtual reality and augmented reality technologies to the market. These are not just pipe dreams. These are actually devices that have received clearance from the agency. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about MassMedic's regulatory Roundup that happened this last Tuesday in Massachusetts. I had the opportunity to be there, and that was held, the keynote was Jeff Shuren, who is the Center Director for Devices and Radiological Health, so the chief device guy in the United States. And then the FDA draft guidance on human factors. This comes on the heels of a 2016 document that tells us all about how we should be thinking about human factors. That's how people interface with medical devices. We'll be telling you about that in just a minute. Let's go to the virtual reality devices. So this from a report from FDA. But first of all, what is AR? What is VR? AR is augmented reality. It's a little bit more than you see with your own eyes, whereas virtual reality is something that completely replaces your own vision. So an AR device might overlay things into the real world that you also see through the goggles. Virtual reality completely replaces it. So for example, FDA says that an AR system that overlays medical images onto a patient during an operation to help guide the surgeon, that would be an AR medical device. A VR system that's used to treat post-traumatic stress disorder in Army veterans would be a VR device because it's probably going to take over the entire range of vision and show a synthetic world. A VR rehabilitation therapy that simulates real-life situations to improve physical functions for patients who have experienced a physical disability associated with a stroke or other medical condition. That's another example of a VR solution. And if these sound like pipe dreams, they're really not. I was actually rather impressed at how many are out there and the domains that they're in. We won't cover all of them, but FDA talks about these areas of interest. These are places where they're seeing a lot of use for AR and VR. Pediatric diagnostics and treatments, pain management, mental health, neurological disorders, surgery planning, intraoperative procedures, ophthalmic diagnostics, telemedicine, virtual care, and post-operative and other rehabilitation therapies. Now, they're clear that they think that there are some benefits to AR, VR. They also think that there are some drawbacks, and this is worth noting if you're thinking about being in this area. Probable benefits that they note is giving better access to healthcare. If you can do some of it remotely, great. Improve healthcare professionals' ability to prepare for certain treatments because you can role play a surgery or some other situation. Fulfill unmet medical needs, mitigate preoperative anxiety, maybe take people again to role play through a situation as a patient that they're about to be in. Make procedures less invasive. I think that's a practice thing again. Accelerate diagnoses and allow for self-directed care. That all sounds great, but here are the risks that FDA has identified. Cyber sickness. If you've ever been in a VR headset, you know that depending on how well that app is programmed, it could make you pretty nauseous pretty quick. The weight of the headset can create head and neck strain. There are also cybersecurity risks, like any device. Privacy risks, and distraction in the operating room. Well, that's for sure. I don't really want my surgeon's hands slipping just because their headset lagged. They focus also specifically on pediatric populations. They worry about worsening disparities in diagnostics and treatment. They also worry about unknown side effects and/or risks, particularly in vulnerable populations. But all that being said, it remains that they're starting to clear some of these devices. Here's one called the Knee Plus, and it is indeed an augmented surgical reality device. Wearing a headset, the surgeon is able to see information displayed on their heads-up display while they are performing the surgery. This isn't science fiction. This is actually cleared to the market. Knee Plus from the company Pixie Medical. And also this CureSight, if that looks like a 1980s era red-blue 3D glasses, you're right. This one is meant for amblyopia or lazy eye. So it's something that the user, pediatrics in many cases, are able to use to actually treat lazy eye, and it's a 3D app. That's just two of the examples that we've seen from FDA. Again, there's 37 others. If you scan that QR code right there, you can get to all of them and research them. But these are generally in the areas of augmented reality for surgery, virtual reality for training, games for therapy, and so forth. So it's really cool to see these making it out to the market. It's going to be really fun to watch as this part of the market develops. Next up, an update on the regulatory roundup that was held last Tuesday in Massachusetts. It was a great event in the Massachusetts ecosystem. It was put on December 6th. Brian, Kayla, Nicole, Rachel, and Anna are the team at MassMedic who put it on, very much like our own organizations here in Michigan. And they, for their local ecosystem, put this event on. They had representatives from startups, from service providers. They also had Jeff Shuren from CDRH speaking. Some of the points of note that came out, and many of these are just echoes of things that we see in our own ecosystem here in Michigan. They're finding that parts of FDA continue to lag, OHT7 especially, because of their heavy involvement in EUA processing during COVID. So that means there's parts of FDA that are catching up more quickly. There are parts of FDA that are still lagging. There's also a lot of reflection on the massive turnover at the agency. While the agency and CDRH in particular did a great job under COVID, it remains that they've lost an immense amount of their staff. In fact, they're having to use contractors to review submissions. Third-party outside contractors are now heavily part of the review process, in part because of the loss of staff at FDA. Now, there are also some new submission mechanisms at the agency. There's something called eStar, and there's something called the Customer Collaboration Portal. And both of these got relatively good reviews from folks. One of those is only about 2 months old. But the Customer Collaboration Portal appears to be a good thing for the industry that's making submissions to FDA. eStar, not so much. It was not panned, but we'll say it got an 80% rating. Room for improvement. So good to hear about these sorts of innovations. On the software side, the resounding echo was that predetermined change control plans are the hot topic of the day. If you're developing software for FDA, especially if it's artificial intelligence and machine learning software, predetermined change control plans are where all of the focus is going. The idea there is that you ought not to have to go back and resubmit for a change to your software device. You should not have to do another 510K or another de novo. But in order to have that kind of freedom to make changes, you effectively have to predict what kind of changes you're gonna make. And that's where people are spending a lot of time these days, on software change control plans. Breakthrough device submissions also really high on the list of topics, lots of those happening. They're becoming a little more selective though, because of so many people wanting to go through that program. There's also a great presentation by Pam Forrest from Covington on the decline in enforcement letters from FDA. Now you might just think FDA doesn't have as much time to do enforcement. And so people aren't seeing as much of that. But it doesn't mean they're paying less attention. It turns out that what it means is they're using other methods. So rather than just going out there and sending warning letters to people, FDA is maybe being a little nicer. They're doing directed inspections. They're doing what are called untitled letters and more regulatory meetings to perhaps more softly raise concerns before sending a formal 483 or other type of communication to the companies. So I think overall that's good, but if you hear about a decline, it's not really a decline in scrutiny, it's a change in the mechanism. There was a great presentation from one Eric Bannon of AlvaMed, who gave a great presentation on Q-sub or pre-submission trends with the FDA. The things that FDA is focusing on in those types of communications, clinical study design and sample size, right up near the top. We've seen that in our practice, and they're seeing that in Boston too. Test plan design. It's such a common thing, and we've told you before about the clinical investigator training that's happening with FDA. I think FDA recognizes that clinical investigators are often focused on creating academic papers. They're not often focused on the type of information that's necessary to be able to get a clearance through FDA. And so test plan design, whether clinical or otherwise, is a really common focus in Q submissions. Regulatory interactions, pathway decisions are very central to those Q subs as well. We also heard from Eric that IDEs are getting harder and harder and harder to get. That in fact, the standard for getting an IDE now rivals the burden. Actually, I think this was from an internal commentator, one of our staff, who said the weight of that rivals a 510K, that it takes basically as much effort to get approved for a high-risk device trial as it does to get cleared to a 510K. So watch for that. And then the session with Dr. Shurin, who's the head of CDRH, he talked about the agency's and the division's priorities for 2023. And some of it is relatively mundane, implementation of MDUFA or the Medical Device User Fee Act, version 5 of that. Enough to make your eyes water, right? The return from COVID was another focus. The agency realizing that they have a lot of coming back to do, as well as strategic priorities for the future. And the one I want to focus on here is actually the return from COVID, because it probably is the biggest point of focus for companies working with FDA. Dr. Shurin noted that the FDA is having to face the reality that the agency is not as much of a destination as it was in years past. In years past, people would make the FDA their career. And today, with the rise of virtual work, remote work, it turns out that FDA doesn't have the holding power right now that the commercial world does. And so the agency is seeing many people come to the FDA for a couple of years and then leave. Now, Dr. Shurin's a great manager. He's done a great job working with his staff. He always has. He really had the place humming pre-COVID and during COVID. But I think what he is having to admit is that people are going to be leaving. They're going to be using FDA now as a stepping stone. And while he's dealing well with that, this is really not very good for those of us in the world of trying to get devices and other products cleared through the agency. Because what it now means is that your regulators, whether they're drug or device or biologic, are mostly fresh out of school. They're mostly fresh PhDs. And while the agency is having to deal with that and do their best to keep people around, recognizing that many will leave, what this means is that for any submission that you do, the chances are that somewhere in the middle of that submission or on the next submission you do, you're not going to have the same regulators. They won't have the track record. They won't have the history. Sure, there will be career people at FDA still, but that number is certainly going down. And that's not generally good news for the rest of the industry. So hopefully there will be a way to change this trend around in coming years. And finally, in our news, new FDA guidance on human factors. Now, you say, well, FDA's issued guidance on human factors before, and that's true. But what they hadn't given us was a good way to break human factors considerations up into different categories. Human factors, of course, human-device interaction, usability, how the person actually interfaces with a product. FDA says the goal of human factors assessment is to ensure that the device user interface has been designed such that use errors that occurred during the use of the device that could cause harm or degrade medical treatment are either eliminated or reduced to the extent possible. The main factors to consider in a risk-based approach to human factors assessment, as described in this draft guidance, include the identification of critical tasks and the elimination or reduction of use-related hazards. So they're saying the real focus here is risk. We want to eliminate risk, not just device risk by itself, but use risk as we interface with the device. And graciously, they also note that they believe that it's optimal to minimize use-related risks, but it may not be necessary or practical to eliminate all use-related device risks. So that's good. That's sane. We like to hear that. This rides on the heels of the 2016 usability guidance that still stands and is final. This is not a draft. But if we go back to this draft guidance that was just issued recently, they have this in the middle of it, and it's very, very important. It's a flow chart. And they ask this question: is the change being made a modification to an existing device? If the answer is yes, then the question becomes, is there a change to any of the following? Are you changing the user interface? Are you changing the intended users? Are you changing the intended use, the use environment, the training, or the labeling? If you are not changing those, congratulations. You are in Category 1. All you have to do is provide conclusion and high-level summary of your human factors evaluation. This is the thing that hasn't really existed before. That if you don't surpass this level of concern, your burden is minimized, and FDA is making that explicit. This is going to become a real focus for human factors engineering, looking to see, can we get into Category 1? Now, if there wasn't a change to these things, congratulations, you're Category 1, but if there was a change to these, then it takes us down to the next section. The question becomes, are there critical tasks for new devices? Or for modified devices, are there new critical tasks? And they define that elsewhere. But are there things that happen that really, if they don't happen, something's going to go wrong? And if you've already thought about the critical tasks and you haven't added any new ones, well, then you're probably in good shape. But if you are adding new critical tasks, that's when the focus is going to come. So that's how you get into Category 3 if there are new, what are called critical tasks. But if you don't have any new ones, you've thought about them all, then you're submission Category 2. And that gives you this medium level of burden. These are all shown by this table. If you are in Category 1, you can just give a conclusion and a high-level summary. If you're in Category 2, you have to add descriptions of intended use, user interface, known use problems. And if you're in Category 3, you have to provide all the elements listed. But we think this is a great addition to what FDA has done before with their usability guidance, because it gives us a way to categorize the relative risk. And if you've seen lately how much work human factors engineering can be, this is a welcome addition to the process. The guidance, which again, if you scan the QR code on the first slide we showed, you can get to the guidance in all of its glory. But there are examples listed. And if you want to take a look, there's a whole bunch of examples for 510Ks, for PMAs, everything under the sun as to how you might end up into any one of those categories that are listed. Well, that's it for our news today. Hope you're enjoying that. What we're going to show you next comes from November 1st. It was our interview with Dr. Philip Olla of Audacia Biosciences. We have to give a shout out to Dr. Olla as well. He, as a member of the MedHealth Steering Committee, was running around behind the scenes arranging many of the interviews that you've now seen on MedTech Crossroads. We've still got a few more of those to come. Coming up in a future week, we're going to have Molly McCarthy from Microsoft, who spoke with us on the program. But today, Dr. Philip Olla and Audacia Bioscience, as we heard from Dr. Hesberg last week, talking about the nexus between transportation, cognition, vision, and microprocessing. It's a very, very fertile field. And Dr. Olla's company, Audacia Biosciences, is working on sensors, especially for places like vehicles. Now, if you think, what does that have to do with healthcare? The reality is a lot, because the types of things that these sensors can collect are considered protected health data. For example, if you're breathing and something can be learned about your health, that's going to become protected health data. But if there's something we can do to keep people safer on the roads, do we want to access that? It raises a lot of questions, a lot of use for sensors, microprocessors, and other ways to interface with humans in the environment of an automobile. Let's hear from Dr. Olla. I'm Gene Paranak, host of MedTech Crossroads, and I am here with Dr. Philip Olla.
Correct.
Who is, first of all, I got to say, on the steering committee of MedHealth, and we're here at the MedHealth Summit at Ford Field, having a great time. So thanks for joining me here.
No problem. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, and thanks for all your volunteer time that you've spent. And actually, you were instrumental in organizing a lot of the interviews that we did today. So really appreciate that.
No problem.
Getting out there and just making everything happen.
Yeah, it's been a busy day, but it's going well, though.
It's going really well. And you are the CEO of Audacia Biosciences, which, this I love, a breath company.
Yeah, we could say a breath research company.
Breath research company.
Yes.
Tell us more about just what this means. What is breath research?
So breath, it can be called Excel breath research or volatinomics or Excel breath metabolism. But the concept is when we exhale, there are thousands of particles that can come out from our breath. But as time's gone on, what we've learned to do is to isolate some of those particles. And what we can do is we can, I won't say diagnose or screen, but you can identify patterns in people's breath. So recently we had a COVID breathalyzer that was approved by the FDA. What they're doing is identify what are the key patterns that a person who is positive with COVID exhales, and then you use some artificial intelligence, and then you create a breath print for that. It's the same with TB. You can distinguish between 17 different cancers using Excel breath.
Wow.
So the idea really is that breath is a very viable alternative for screening, for wellness and for disease screening and for environmental monitoring. And what we're trying to do is look at new ways to analyze the compounds and particles in the air, but more on the side of how do we then present this information so that it becomes meaningful, so that you can use it for behavior change, you can use it to automate the way the car should behave. So there's a lot of different applications that can come from analyzing breath. But it's a field that has really evolved over time, and it's becoming more mature now because of the computational tools that we have to be able to analyze what is being exhaled and what's in the air.
And I think most people, when they think of breath, first of all, it's like, wow, you can think about things with breath. And then they think of a breathalyzer and they go, oh, yeah, alcohol testing. And then they hear the word car and they go, oh, yeah, that's what you use breath for in cars is alcohol testing. But that's not the only thing you're looking at.
No, actually, to be honest, that's the one thing that we don't want to look at from the beginning, because it is just so controversial about, yes, you can detect drug usage and alcohol usage in the car with the next generation technology, and it's ambient detection, so you don't need to blow into a device. And now you know that technology is coming down the line. A lot of people are worried that, well, if you implement this technology, then my car won't start if there's someone in the car that's had drugs or that's had alcohols, and there's a lot of concern. And on the flip side, people that are very conscious about drug and drink driving, they're saying if this technology exists, then nobody should be allowed to drive a car without going through the screening. So it is a very controversial topic. Now, the approach we're taking is we know that that exists, and there's a lot of ethics around the ambient collection of breath. But what we're looking at is we're looking at it from a health, wellness, and screening point of view, early warning screening. What are the things that we can do in a car that actually helps the individual? So we're not trying to police anything. We're trying to look at what are the valuable applications that we could do. But the first step for us is to develop and integrate the infrastructure into a car. And then we can then look at the values and the data coming back, and then we can start exploring, okay, now what do you want to know? What do you want to do? What are the different applications that you can implement using this new system?
Because you're basically building a platform technology at that point that you're able to deploy, and it's going to have the ability to, I mean, we might think of like a spectrophotometer for certain substances where you're not limited to looking at one thing, I presume.
Yes, so really it is a platform approach. So I think the first thing that we're going to deploy is going to be an in-cabin monitoring. So with the in-cabin monitoring, we want to look at just general volatile compounds that are present. We want to look at things like your atmospheric pressure, humidity, temperature, lighting, noise, and then all the particle matters that are deemed to be harmful to your health. So we just want to come up with a general profile of what is a really good comfort index for an individual who may have certain medical conditions.
Oh, interesting.
Because we want to personalize that monitoring to individuals. But like you said, the initial variant of the solution is going to really just be collecting data. And then from that point on, we can look at, well, what do we want to monitor? Do we want to stress? Do we want to isolate what compounds a diabetic patient might be exhaling when they have uncontrolled diabetes? Do you want to isolate what are the conditions that cause a person to feel tired and possibly have an accident? So there's a lot of different things that you can do once you have the base infrastructure. And that's why it's important for us to kind of explain that we're really just looking at base infrastructure. We're not monitoring your drugs, we're not monitoring your alcohol. We're putting in the base infrastructure so that we can then develop applications that are useful.
For the person who's listening to this and says, wow, that's kind of cool, what are the kind of partners you're looking for? What sorts of entities would you like to connect with as you move forward?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So we're definitely connecting with some of our healthcare partners that are here at the Med Health, and especially the partners that are exploring how they deliver care away from the hospitals. Because really this one, we've talked a lot about value-based care, other different types. So we're looking for partners that are trying to monitor patients and monitor conditions away from the hospital setting. We're also really looking for the partners that are implementing autonomous vehicles and putting in these advanced features like the camera systems and such into cars, because none of this really works if we don't have a partner in the automobile space. We need an auto partner where we can implement the system and then get the data back. Then another big piece is going to be the users of the system, right? How we present this data is going to have a very important role in how the system is used. Right now, with the base system that we're exploring, it generates over 100 parameters a second. Right? So when you think about how you take that data and summarize it
with it, yeah.
You got to do something really valuable. But we need input from the drivers, and input from patients, and input from people that understand the ergonomics of a vehicle to figure out where does that go. Does it go on the dash? Does it go? There's an audible signal. At what point do you trigger a signal? Yeah. So there's a lot of design features that need to be integrated with the future designs of vehicles. So we're definitely looking at partners from that space, and we're talking to some people to get an idea of, what would be your first project if we were to do this, and you'd be surprised at what they are. So there are some discussions going on with the automobile industry, but then it really it's just then the other key piece will be looking at the different groups that have unique populations that have challenges driving, where this could be something that really makes that driving experience safer for them and for everyone else on the road, and also collects that important data that might be useful for the patients later on.
So it's really interesting, a new company that is actually doing customer discovery. I tip my hat to you.
Yeah, well, we've learned along the way that if you don't, it comes back
It comes back to bite you every single time.
Big time.
Well, that's great. It's a wonderful thing there. What do you, I guess one last question there. From the standpoint of things like HIPAA and things like regulatory clearances, that's going to be obviously going to be a challenge. It may be something that's downstream a little ways, but what thinking have you done in that area?
So that's definitely downstream. And one of the biggest challenges that we're trying to face, it's not actually sensor data, to be honest. It's not what parameters to sense or what to do with it or how to link the data we're getting to health outcomes and to diseases. That should be the hardest thing. But it's not. The hardest thing that we're facing is the data. It's not how you display the data, how do you protect people's data, how do you share that data, who do you share it with. When you get data from the system, which, for example, one use case is pollution, so it monitors the pollution outside and the pollution inside. And when it gets to a point where it's dangerous, what should happen, right? Do you get the car to lower the windows? Do you put it up? Do you close the air? So there's a lot of issues that we have to think about with what to do with the data that's being generated. But to your point about HIPAA, that's another very serious consideration that we have to make. One solution that might work with this is de-identifying all the information, throwing it onto a blockchain, and then somehow having the blockchain and the healthcare systems interact so that they can get value from the data that's being collected. But again, that's one of we got massive ethical issues to overcome, and then the personal health information issue is another big challenge that we have to overcome. Which is funny because you really would think the big challenges around this are the technology and the innovations, but it's not.
Yeah, the implementation and how it fits into the world.
Yes, that's going to be the big challenge. But there's a lot of partnerships and discussions that need to happen, and then we do have to change how we think about data and how we think about health data and how we think about privacy, how we can access our own data and choose to share our data. So there's a massive paradigm shift in, I think they're calling it the democratization of data is what the term is. And I think that's one thing that we have to address with this model after we got through. That's downstream. We still want to do this, and then downstream we'll really have to think about how we deal with that data aspect.
Yeah, but to do the customer discovery, you've got to go out there and you've got to get the data and you've got to figure out what it means and be able to have those discussions.
That's correct. Yeah,
well, it's an exciting world there.
Thank
Dr.
you, Jim.
Philip Olla, Audacia Bioscience.
Thank you for the
thankful
time.
to have you here today, and thank you for all your help with the summit, obviously on the steering committee as well.
We work hard on the steering committee, don't we?
There you go.
It's a lot of work, but it's worth it.
Well, we appreciate having you here today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, it's always great to hear from Dr. Olla. We had a great time there at the MedHealth Summit. It was a wonderful event. We've got one more interview to air from that event, and that is best for last. Molly McCarthy from Microsoft sat down to talk with us, and we'll be bringing that to you in a future week. But that's all for MedTech Crossroads for today. I look forward to seeing you next week. Hope your holiday plans are coming together. And just looking forward to finishing out the year here with you. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.